Open Mental Health is a partnership between the Somerset NHS Foundation Trust, NHS Somerset, Somerset County Council and a voluntary sector alliance. This partnership has worked alongside people with lived experience to develop a thriving mental health ecosystem of support for people in their communities. Open Mental Health operates through a joined-up, locality-based model where the NHS and voluntary sector work together to ensure an individual receives the right support at the right time and in the right place. This can include support around money, benefits and debt, support to be socially connected, community crisis support, one-to-one and group peer support, telephone and online support including a 24/7 voluntary sector-led helpline alongside clinical interventions delivered by the NHS.
It's so great when you go to a meeting and you tell the professionals around you what it's been like, and then a few months later you hear that they've produced this new project or this new thing, and they've listened to you, and that's just amazing. It feels amazing.
The co-production of the Autistic Peer Support Group has been it's really felt a defining moment for me. It's the first time that I've had that level of responsibility for co-designing a project. Co-facilitating it as well has been just a real mind-blowing experience, something I never ever dreamt I would ever do, ever.
Everyone has an equal power within that space, including people who have lived experience and who have perhaps used those services in the past, and they have that equal power alongside everyone else in that space, which is just, it's so needed, and it's made services change for the better in Somerset, I think.
I really believe in co-production, and I love being part of Open Mental Health.
Back when I initially came into the services, we didn't really have many options. It was difficult to be referred into. There was a lot of strict criteria, and it felt like a lot of people were just falling between the cracks with it. It was very tough. There were many people who just weren't receiving adequate support or any at all. Many people were being turned down for various reasons, staffing issues, location. Criteria was always a big one. Now, with Open Mental Health, it's so wonderful that it has been opened up much more because it's given people options.
So it's really good to have people like Mind and Rethink, and we link in well with the Watch and the Balsam Centre, but it feels like there's much more to offer people.
The way that the partnership working in Open Mental Health has gone, and how we can all work together, share information, talk to one another. It's amazing because we are all in this for the same purpose. And it's like Open Mental Health has allowed this to happen in a much more free-flowing way. And I think it's so much better for everybody concerned.
I mean, for me, Open Mental Health has felt like a complete game changer. I came into it, having worked for the NHS previously and other VCSE partnerships, and there was always this separation, really, in the past. What was evident from day one is that it genuinely is a partnership. There is an equality of kind of voice and of influence and of participation in discussions that take place. And that goes across the board, whether that's someone that works for one of the VCSE partners, whether that's colleagues within the NHS or our experts by experience. There is a recognition that everyone has something valuable to contribute.
And it was strange because it felt like something that was so obvious to do for so long, but we hadn't been able to do it. And now we have, and it's worked beautifully. So I think it's helped a lot of people, yeah.
So yeah, before I start this, I'm Mark Harrison, Director of Operations at Breathing Mental Illness. If you'd have seen an earlier version of this programme, you'd have found that Becky Wardle was going to be speaking to you today. Unfortunately, Becky can't be with us, and Becky's been a really important part of supporting the development of open mental health. She can't be here, so unfortunately, you're going to have to make do with me. I hope I do her kind of slides justice, and I hope I do the work of open mental health justice, just in introducing who we are, what we do, and how we came to be formed. So, what is open mental health? I just wanted to go back a step and just reflect on some of the comments from Peter and Mark. Somerset took that decision to become an early implementer, aligned with kind of NHS plans around community mental health transformation back in kind of 2019, and in doing that, they gave permission to the voluntary sector to begin to act in a different way. And I know we've heard that a couple of times already this morning, but I can't understate or overstate what important kind of decision that was from Somerset to want to work with the voluntary and community sector in a different way, because that gave the permission to voluntary sector organisations who, as Mark said, were perhaps used to competing with one another, working with each other in a slightly different way, to think very differently about how they engaged, how they worked together, and what they wanted to do with one another. So that permission, if you like, from the system to act in a different way enabled the voluntary and community sector to think very differently about how they act, how they coordinate, how they kind of begin to develop a very different model of working in Somerset, and the fruits of it are here for us to all see today. And by the way, I don't want to suggest that was kind of a seamless journey. I don't want to suggest that it was kind of a load of people getting into the room, shaking hands and deciding to be friends. It was tricky. You're talking about organisations who are coming from different places, as I say, used to competing with one another at times. So it was a journey, and it was a challenge, and actually those challenges do still exist. It's not plain sailing all the time. However, it really has given that group of organisations, wide group of organisations, as we'll see in a second, permission to act and form in a very different way. And I think that needs to be recognised and held in our minds as we kind of go through today. And the second bit, which I think is really important, is, again, as others have already said, that role of co-production being centred to everything from the start of the programme of work. So recognising that actually in terms of what kind of open mental health was set up to achieve and what the system wanted to achieve, had to be kind of built and baked around the experiences of people with lived experience. Services had to be co-produced, and the offer had to be co-produced around what people said was missing within the system. And I think adhering to that principle, as the work of open mental health became established, has really helped kind of shape the future direction of open mental health. So, what is open mental health? It's a partnership. It's between the NHS Trust, it's between the voluntary sector, and there are a number of organisations who work as part of open mental health. So, as you can see here, a real diverse range of organisations, and really important to kind of again emphasise that this isn't just kind of a handful of favoured organisations that the NHS are working with. It's a number of partners working across the system in a collaborative way. So a range of organisations with different skills, experiences and expertise. Very small kind of local community-based grassroots organisations. We've got Minehead Eye, Conquest Centre, It's OK to Be You, alongside some of those kind of larger national, regional organisations like Mind, Second Step, ourselves at Breathing Mental Illness. And because we've got that diverse range of organisations working across the alliance, we're greater than the sum of our parts. So we all play to our own strengths to kind of build that kind of collaborative service offer, which really does reach into communities across Somerset. And again, we're not there yet. It was mentioned at the end of that video, the kind of work around kind of wider community engagement and reaching some of those kind of underserved communities. But actually, the network of organisations who form the alliance enable that kind of reach to grow and expand. Thank you, Jamie. And again, we've already heard about some of these key principles, so I won't kind of run through them line by line. But again, these key principles were ones that were co-produced with people with lived experience. So these were the principles on which the foundations of the Alliance have been built. I will just pick out a couple. We've already mentioned open access. So that's the sense that people can easily access services, and wherever they come into the service, that they're supported and they're picked up, and warm transfers happen between the different organisations within the system. There is a whole system approach built in here. So this is the NHS and the voluntary sector working as a single team in the localities in which it operates. and not as disparate or separate organisations. And on that final point around building on community assets, I just wanted to dwell on that for a second. Already mentioned that this isn't just a handful of kind of well-known charities working across the Alliance. This is a diverse range of organisations who are working as part of the system. But I think as the role of kind of open mental health and this way of working expands, it isn't just about mental health. Charities and mental health organisations and those traditional organisations coming together to work around mental illness. It's thinking about the wider determinants of mental illness. So what about housing? What about employment? What about training? What about education? So I think as the work of this group grows and develops, I think it is about looking at those kind of wider community assets and those wider community services that can support people with their mental health. So what does this kind of look like in practice then? So we've talked about at a high level how the Alliance kind of came to be and the principles of how the Alliance came to form. But what does it do? How does it work? How does it function? So first of all, it's not kind of a small amount of money that flows through the Alliance. There is a significant amount of funding that flows through the work and to support the delivery of different services. So there we can see over £3 million a year kind of flowing into open mental health to support the delivery of work, and other substantial funding to pilot and test new models of delivery also flows through the Alliance. And again, another thing that the Alliance agreed to when it was set up was this kind of sense of setting up a grant fund to support those kind of local community grassroots organisations who perhaps don't have the time to kind of spend writing massive grant applications, to kind of bid for services, go through kind of tender and procurement processes, kind of creating that kind of grant to distribute to those organisations to support the vital work that they do in local communities has been really, really important. So around £500,000 of that funding kind of distributed to those micro organisations, those small grassroots organisations, to continue to do the really important work that they do in their local communities. And I wanted to finish just with a kind of impact on an individual. So Janie's going to talk a little bit about some of the kind of early indicators that formed out of the work of open mental health. Well, I just wanted to share Max's story, and I'm going to read this off my notes because I think it's important to kind of tell this in its truest form. Max is not the individual's real name, but the story is a real case. So Max had been in and out of secondary care mental health services over the years, sometimes getting support from his GP and often escalating into crisis. He never really was getting the support he needed to stay well for a long period of time. One Monday morning, an open mental health partner working at a small local charity met Max, who was in the street in a state of distress and agitation. Max's benefits had been stopped. He was without money or food. His mental health was deteriorating and he was escalating into crisis. It's probably a case and an issue that we see time and time out in the services that many of us will work with him. So what happened to Max? He was accompanied across the road to the local community mental health hub, and colleagues from the hub worked with Max to help him ground himself and de-escalate the situation. Subsequently, a range of support was arranged, which included food from a local food bank, a specialist citizens advised caseworker, and he was supported in a voluntary community sector-led community crisis safe space. Max was always set up with a peer support worker who could help him kind of begin to think about kind of the next steps in his recovery journey. Within a few days, Max's benefits had been reinstated and he was linked up with a multidisciplinary team. A voluntary sector recovery and wellbeing worker worked alongside Max's clinical team to put the right support in place. So again, the sense that this was an integrated team working around Max and not an individual being handed from pillar to post in the system. He was safe, his needs were being met, and he was on the path to recovery. As we know, the story for many people living with mental illness has often been different. Accident and emergency departments are often a port call for people who are suffering crisis or experiencing crisis. The primary care and certainly the emergency services will often be involved. But actually that's not what people need when they need help. They need the kind of support that we've just described that Max received. So Max's story is just one example of the individual impact that open mental health has had on people's lives. We think it's an important story to tell, an important story to share. And Jane's going to share a little bit more information on some of the kind of wider impacts of the work of open mental health and the early work. So I'm going to hand over to Jane.
Thank you. So my name's Jane Yendall and I'm the Service Director for Mental Health and Learning Disabilities in Somerset Foundation Trust. And you'll all be pleased to hear that I'm having nothing else to do with technology today. I do apologise. So I think I'm going to talk a little bit about enablers, impact and achievement. So I think Peter and Mark talked a lot about the key enablers, relationships and culture change, and really being brave to do things differently. I think resources without a doubt helped, and being able to flow those resources to frontline grassroots organisations. And I think, as Mark said, you know, in a funny sort of way, the pandemic was an enabler, because obviously we were an early implementer. We knew we'd got the early Trailblazer money in 2019. And when the pandemic struck, I suppose there was a bit of a temptation to say, well, I wasn't tempted, but there might have been a temptation to say, let's pause, let's think, you know, let's reflect, let's kind of see what happens with the pandemic. But I think in Somerset, we felt that the Somerset population needed us to accelerate our ambitions. So the pandemic was an enabler, and you know, again, because we were in a pandemic, we were able to be quite bureaucratically light. So there wasn't a project initiation document in sight. There was a group of willing people who wanted to get on and operationalise a model. And I think that was really important. We do have proper policies and standard operating procedures in place now, but there was an absolutely just need to deliver this important service to the people in Somerset. We agreed early on, this were the relationships that we had with some of our voluntary sector partners, and that some of our voluntary sector partners had historically had with one another, meant that relationships could be bumpy, and we agreed that we would absolutely have a narrative that we would make mistakes, but that we would learn from those mistakes and galvanise ourselves into an improved model. And alongside that, having that kind of key role of our recovery partners and experts by experience who kind of guiding us as and when we did make mistakes and we need to strengthen part of our operating model. So, yeah, I'm not having anything more to do with technology. Yeah. So what? Now, I sometimes, you know, looking through life with a mental health lens, you do get a bit fed up with ED waiting times and hearing about that and ED attendances, but it is an important lens. It's an important barometer for seeing the success of system-wide changes. It's very early days, but a cautious look at the impact is that we are seeing a significant reduction in the ED attendances. And the bit for me that's important to that is that means that people with mental health problems are being seen in the right place by the right people at the right time, rather than going to an ED department where, whilst they are amazing people, it's not the right environment for people with mental health difficulties. So I think, you know, this is data that we're going to keep looking at, this kind of system level data. So just moving on to some of our achievements. I'm not going to go through this line by line because I think we're all able to absorb it. But I think the key thing is that we continue to be ambitious, and we continue to think about how we can improve access for people, whether that's a helpline or web chat function, websites, and really aiming to keep waiting times to an absolute bare minimum. And you know, another example is really that recruitment and induction of our expert by experience and recovery partners. Another really important example was, for example, our Somerset Recovery College at the beginning of the pandemic, immediately, almost overnight, provided many courses online just to keep that access going and keep the momentum going around the changes. So last but not least, we're now in the process of developing, like many other organisations, mental health providers, community rehabilitation service. First decision, we want to do this with our voluntary sector partners. We're looking at a new community engagement project because we're very aware that there's elements of our model that are still quite traditional, that require service users to come to us to access our services rather than being out there and part of people's communities.
So that's something that's really important. And we've launched a few new services and we're continuing to grow our alliance partners with new partners. I think ourselves and the ICB very early on said open mental health can't be a closed shop of people who happened to be in the room at the time when we first started this project. It needed to continue to expand and grow and involve new people. Just apologise for my cough. So that's it from us.